Welcome to episode 24 in this chess puzzle adventure series starring Bobby Fischerman, Average Joe, and Peter Potzer. Previously, Bobby Fischerman was defeated by the Caterpillar in the Puzzle Island competition, although it turns out it appeared that the Caterpillar had been cheating, and Bobby Fischerman was left wondering what to do next. Meanwhile, back at Potzer Prison, Average Joe and Peter Potzer had decided that they needed to escape the prison. They didn't know what had happened to Bobby, but they felt like he wasn't coming anytime soon. So one day, while they were in the cafeteria about to eat lunch, they decided that they would ask Officer Pawnpusher if he would let them go. So they approached him and said, "Can we leave the prison?" He chuckled and said, "If you can beat me in a game of chess, I'll let you leave. But if not, you have to stay here." He said, "In fact, I'll play one of you right now." Now, Average Joe, being the stronger player, felt obligated to accept the challenge, and he said, "Okay, I'll play you." The officer said, "You can have white. Good luck." And they proceeded to play the following game. So Average Joe was white, and he decided to open up with the English opening. The officer played e5, and Average Joe played knight to c3. And then the officer played a very interesting move, bishop to b4. This was not something that Joe was familiar with. And he decided to play knight to d5 because he thought he saw a clever idea if the bishop retreated to a5. And in fact, that's what was played in the game. And here, Average Joe noticed that if he played b4 and the bishop retreated, he could follow it up with c5 and actually trap the bishop. This is called the Noah's Ark trap. This is an idea that he had seen before, and he thought the officer had made a mistake. So he played the move b4. And here, Officer Pawnpusher played c6, actually counterattacking the knight on d5 and allowing his bishop to be captured. After looking at it for a little while, Average Joe decided that the only thing he could do is go for this trade, because if he moved the knight back somewhere, then he would simply lose a pawn. So he did take the bishop, and the officer captured his knight. And here, Average Joe captured the pawn on d5, and then the officer played the move knight to f6. And here, Average Joe noticed that both of these pawns were under attack, and he decided to focus on this one and play the move queen to a4 to defend the pawn. And here, the officer captured on d5, and Average Joe felt like it was a good time to strike at the center and at the same time attack the knight. So he played the move e4. Here, the officer retreated with knight to f6, and Average Joe played bishop to b2. He felt like he needed to develop some pieces, and he noticed that this was defended by his queen, so he wasn't worried about that. Instead, he created the counterattack on the e5 pawn. The officer played knight to c6, defending, but at the same time, creating an attack on the pawn over here on a5. Now, Average Joe probably should have left it alone, but he was concerned about this and decided to play the move a6, as he felt like it was offering a trade and he wasn't going to lose the pawn. The officer ignored it and simply castled. And here, Average Joe decided to play the move bishop to c3 because he was worried about this knight and he wanted to restrict its options. He felt like putting his bishop here was a good spot for the bishop to be on. The problem, as you guys may have noticed, is that he was neglecting his development on the king side. The officer played d5, striking at the center. Average Joe captured on b7 and then played the move f3, trying to simply defend his pawn here on e4. The officer captured, and Average Joe recaptured. And then Officer Pawnpusher played the move knight to d4, centralizing the knight, unleashing the bishop, and Average Joe started to get worried. He didn't like the look of that knight sitting in the center of the board, and he decided to take it. The officer captured with the pawn, and here Average Joe noticed that he had a problem with his e4 pawn. It was attacked 2 times. His queen was no longer defending it, and he decided that pushing to e5 was a good idea because he saves the pawn and at the same time attacks the knight. However, there was a very nice move that the officer played. What do you think he played? If you had a chance to look at that, it's a very simple move, rook to e8. And simply sliding the rook over actually is a very powerful move because it pins the pawn so it can't take the knight. But now white has a problem with the king, and it's not really easy to deal with that. Average Joe tried to play knight to f3 to defend his pawn like this, but the officer simply took the knight, and then after the recapture, he took the pawn on e5 with check, and Average Joe's position was falling apart. Average Joe looked at the move bishop to e2, blocking the check, but he noticed that if he did that, the pawn would push forward and attack him. Didn't want to lose his bishop, so he decided to play the move king to d1. And here the officer continued to build up the pressure, rook to c8, cutting off the king's escape squares on the c file. Here, Average Joe played f4, just trying to create some counterplay. The officer simply retreated the rook to e7. Here, Average Joe played rook to g1. He wasn't really sure what to do, but he thought at least here the rook can line up on the king, and maybe at some point in the future, he can get his queen over there and go for a checkmate threat. However, the officer was not going to give him time to do that and played knight to e4, which actually threatens checkmate on f2. Average Joe didn't know what to do. He was getting worried, and he decided to play bishop c4, trying to give his king some escape squares on the c file by blocking off the rook. The officer continued with a really nice move, knight to c3 check. It's not only a fork, he's also sacrificing the piece to ultimately open up the queen. And of course, Average Joe didn't want to lose his queen, so he took the knight. The officer recaptured with the discovered check. And after Average Joe tried to escape, the queen came down. And after king to b3, queen to b2 checkmate was played. And the officer chuckled and said, "Well, I guess you're not leaving the prison today." Now, at this point, Average Joe and Peter Potzer were feeling very discouraged, having realized that the officer was a very strong player and it was not going to be easy to beat him. But as they walked back out of the cafeteria, they didn't notice that the prison chef was looking at their game and followed them back to their cells. And that's where we'll pick up our story next time. Thank you guys for watching. And as always, stay sharp, play smart, and take care.